and get your squad ready. I think that's the last straw for David, because I think they signed up to a deal that they probably didn't understand 4 years ago. Bob Hunter had addressed it this week. I think David a little bit, saying we now know that's not viable long term to not take central funding and TV money. Whether,
of course, yeah.
Whether he had
there's
that
something
advice
there,
for
isn't there, on a mistake from the Wolfpack, but also kind of set up to fail kind of attitude from everyone else.
Exactly.
Which is, yeah.
And the one thing I will add, and there's a lot of conversation about Sonny Bill Williams' salary and coming in, and that, Toronto's not making money now. There's two parts that I think are super important to address with that. Is number one, as Scott said, there's a lot of missed sponsorship opportunity by not having home games in Toronto where David can sell. And David's a salesman. Anyone that knows him, has talked to him, seen an interview, the man is a salesman, and he can capitalize on that kind of excitement around Sonny Bill Williams to make it count. But the second part is that the Super League and everyone was very happy, and they were doing it through the first few games of the season to trout Sonny Bill Williams' face out there, use it to promote the sport, and put it out there. And so to say, Toronto's in trouble now because they've spent this ludicrous amount on Sonny Bill Williams, you tell me this. What other club in Super League could have got Sonny Bill Williams to switch codes and come play in Super League? I don't know if there's anyone else that could have, just based on the amount of money being put into it. So if you're going to capitalize and spend the money and promote the game using him, and then come back 6 months later during a global pandemic and say, you probably overspent on him, too bad for you. That's some of the hypocrisy that I don't like. But again, you have to look after your own club. So I think at the end of the day, there's mistakes Toronto's made, but I also think there's a lot to be said for the value Toronto brings to the sport. And I just think, it's overall disappointing. That's how I would look. I think there's mistakes on all sides that just make it a really regrettable situation that probably Toronto could have handled better, Super League could have handled better. And ironically, the RFL seems to be the best ones handling it with what Ralph Rimmer came out and said today. So, that was a nice surprise. But, I think overall it's a regrettable situation that I think all sides would love to handle better, is you could put the clock back 6 months.
I think from my own personal perspective, the part of it that I find the most regrettable, to be honest, is kind of the fallout between the fan bases. There's obviously people in the UK who aren't supportive of Toronto, see them as a threat to their own clubs and those sorts of things. But on a personal level, I think you guys, the fans, haven't deserved any of this as what's happened, and what might get worse or what might happen. We don't know. I mean, you guys have been watching the club since it started. You've been a presence at the stadium from the League One days, and obviously you brought a group of people together that probably weren't all rugby league fans either, which is one of the great things about the Toronto Wolfpack, that they brought more people to rugby league. How does it personally feel, Scott, the sort of backlash from a section of the UK fans against Toronto, and maybe some of the glee that some of those maybe have felt with what happened over the last week or so? How do you feel about that, and how does it impact within the Toronto fan base? Are they aware of this, and does it put them off the sport?
I think it's nothing new, to be perfectly honest. We've sort of faced backlash since League One, especially for those who never had any want or will to even see us in the league. I will say, anyone who has come over to a Toronto game, including, we have some amazing friends we've made from people coming over, from Lee, from Chev. Swinton was a wonderful time the 2 times they came over. Anyone who actually came into Toronto, those fans have always become our biggest supporters because they see what we're doing. No offense to Lee, they're not drawing a crowd in Toronto because we're playing the Lee Centurions. No one knew who they were before. Most people that are at a Toronto Wolfpack game and Toronto could probably not point out Lee specifically where they are on a map. Because they've created such a great atmosphere in such an event in the middle of the summer, when in Toronto, which is one of the biggest cities in North America and is not, short on events during the summer, you're getting 7,500 to 9,000 people into an older stadium that's a concrete block. What they've done is phenomenal. On the fan base stuff, I think we would have started seeing more people become a fan of Toronto once we saw Super League games in Toronto. seeing it on TV, or just having fans coming back to their clubs being like, here's what they're doing. Like, it's not a bad thing. But unfortunately, we didn't get there. And most of the Super League clubs aren't going to listen to the championship clubs who are being like, this is a good thing. And they're like, okay, whatever, move on. It's a bit of a threat. But I think, we're not the, how can I say this nicely? We're a bit of a antagonist on Twitter, and we're aware of that.
Yeah.
We call people out. Henry comes from a journalistic background. I come from a government background, and we call people out, and we like engaging in that debate. But it's sort of you see the social media, people come on the Facebook page for the Toronto Wolfpack, like a fan page, and are gloating that we're not doing well. You're like, what are you doing with your life? Like, why are you celebrating when a club's not doing well? When we had clubs that were facing financial difficulties in the past, a lot of Wolfpack supporters threw in money to help these clubs out. The Bradford when they're dealing with stuff, and a few other clubs. And, you don't see that same, base coming back to us. I think, like, as I said, like, once Toronto was going to host games in Super League, I think it would have changed things a bit. But there are still going to be people who hate the fact that they can't go to the away game on an hour's drive. And we know that. And funny enough, actually, before the virus, me and Henry were heading over to see the game in York. I think we were playing Wakefield. And we were pumped. So it was my first trip over. Henry went to Rochdale 2 years ago. He loved it. He made a wonderful speech in Rochdale, which I'm sure was a good time. And, we do have a decent support base in the UK that travels with the team. It's just such a wonderful opportunity. And unfortunately, like, we're sort of stuck in the middle right now, right? But I'm sure Henry has some opinions on this as well.
I think, even to quickly add to it, is I think there's a lot of misunderstanding so actually, before I even get to that, I think we can see the frustration that people have with the Wolfpack. There's also frustration with RFL. And we've seen that in the time that the Wolfpack had come in, some of the issues that have been in the air, or even with Super League when at the 11th hour they were deciding whether the Wolfpack could come in or not. So I think we now know 4 years later, some of the things that were said about Wolfpack and are still being said aren't necessarily the Wolfpack, but it's 100 years of history where clubs have some of this negative feeling because they have a reason to. And I think we understand that a lot more now than we did coming in. And we, Scott addressed us personally. We know what we're doing on Twitter, and we have some fun with it. We had Derek Beaumont, the owner of Lee, threatening to cancel a TV match back in our first year because we wound him up. So we know who we are. But in terms of some of the negative feelings, I think there's a lot of misunderstanding because of a lack of leadership from maybe the Super League or even the RFL over the last few years, where people are still complaining that Toronto is taking too much money out of the game when they're not taking any money, or they're paying over their salary cap, and that's not a fact. And so I think there's a lot of misunderstanding coming from a genuine place of where clubs have been treated a certain way for a long time, and Toronto's the easy outlet and the easy target. So that's what I would say. We understand a lot more now why there's so much negativity towards the Wolfpack, and unfortunately the missteps that the Wolfpack have made over the last few months and the last few years make it even easier for some of these people to be set in their ways and maybe not accept them or accept the fans or accept the idea of expansion in the way that this should have been. I think that's probably the biggest regret that I would have as a fan of Toronto, is that Toronto's made enough mistakes that they didn't need to make, that they would have had a hard time if they hadn't. And I think so. I think there's some justification in the way that some fans in the UK feel, and we shouldn't be too surprised. And I think the more we understand why they feel that way, that's how you understand how to sell to them and sell the idea of Toronto for the future.
Yeah, because you guys, like you say, have made plenty of friends along the way, as well as taking on board some enemies that would have been enemies of a club if they were not the same, not the Toronto Wolfpack. If they were even from Edinburgh or Dublin, I'm sure they would have had the same sort of issues from some sections. And even if they didn't have such antagonistic fans on Twitter.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, like, that we met some fantastic people, and I would say 95% of rugby league interactions for us have been very positive. But we all know the minority is the vocal minority that are hurling abuse to the terraces at a match, or abusing a referee or abusing other fans. So we know that, and I think it's unfortunate because the negativity is always the one that's addressed. It is interesting, though, because even this week you've seen the Wolfpack pull out amid all these issues and waiting for their future, and you've had 4 clubs jump in and say, oh, we'll take their spot, which has then fueled teams saying, they don't deserve to be there. Then you have the championship saying there's no promotion, so you've got teams that are at the top of the championship that want back in Super League. They see a club dropping out. Of course their fans are going to be upset and that they want that spot. And so when you take it in context, some of the negativity towards Toronto is also more frustration about the whole other can of worms that's being opened by no promotion relegation.
Well, let's look to the future, I suppose, because that's kind of where we're looking at now. We're talking on promotion and relegation and what will happen in 2021. I mean, first of all, Scott, what league do you think the Wolfpack will be in next year? And then what changes do you expect to see with the club medium to long term to see, if the club does remain in existence, for how, there's been talk of change of to a fan ownership model, for example, or potentially other investors coming in, like the guys who run every other sports team in Toronto. Well, why aren't they running the Wolfpack? They seem to know what they're doing. What do you think? So first on what league you think they'll be in, and then kind of the more long-term stuff, Scott.
Obviously, we'll be switching to the National Rugby League. We're excited to it. No, I'm kidding. Honestly, I think it's going to... I would not be... I don't think we're going to League One. I don't think that's happening. Potentially Championship. We'll see. I would not be surprised on Super League, but I think it's not going to be depending on the chairman. I don't think it's depending on the club owners. I think it might be up to Sky in what Sky wants with that TV deal. But I really don't know. I think it's too early to tell. Obviously, there's a lot of emotions from a lot of people, and the decision makers, there's emotions there as well. I'm glad Super League didn't make a decision immediately after Argyle sort of chatted with them. Medium to long term, I think the community sponsorship model is interesting. It works. It has worked in Canada and North America. Obviously, people have been spouting the Green Bay Packers. The Edmonton the Edmonton Football Club, because they just recently said they're changing their name. And the Saskatchewan Roughriders, the CFL, both are publicly owned as well, like that. So there is some precedence. MLSE, Maple Leaf Sports Entertainment Group, who owns every other club except for the Toronto Arrows. They might own the Rock. I don't even know. They own a lot of people. Would be an interesting, obviously Bob Hunter has experience with them. It would make sense. It's sort of a weird situation just because of how the stadiums work and all that jazz. But medium long term, I think the first thing is, you have to share up how we're going to do liquid assets. You have to have money to pay people on time and how much they're paid. I think that's the first thing. I think we're going to see some changes, hopefully, in how the actual central funding works for the TV. The current Sky contract is, at least in a North American sporting sense, completely ridiculous, especially with how the global rights work. I'll say it here in Canada, if you want to watch rugby league, you have to subscribe to Sportsnet World, which is a $20 per month channel that you can only get on cable, which is a pretty high barrier, and most people don't buy that channel because you don't get any extra coverage. You don't get your hockey's on the main channel. Yeah. On that channel, you have La Liga, and if you're a European sports fan, you have that. So it's a bit of a barrier. I don't know. I think Henry I'll pass over to Henry as I sort of collect my thoughts, and I'll come back.
So what league do you expect to be in, Henry? And do you think, if there is any chance of being in Super League next year, you have to assume it's going to have some sort of conditionality or sanctions applied to it because of the main reason? Because I'd say that is because of the timing of what happened here. Toronto had 4 months to maybe come up with a different plan or strategy, and decided 10 days before they were due to play, or 12 days before they were due to play, to say we're not playing anymore. So do you think there will be some sort of punishment imposed?
So I'll break it down into kind of 3 parts. So first of all, I think before a decision's made, I think more than just a presentation from the owner needs to happen. I think if you're the RFL or the Super League and the RFL, you say, okay, let's open the books, let's see what happened, and find out what went wrong here. I think you can't make a decision